I was 16 the summer I stopped falling asleep before midnight. Nothing dramatic caused it. My parents worked early shifts, so the house went still by 10 and stayed that way until sunrise. And I filled the silence the only way I knew how. I played games. Specifically, I played the cheap, half-broken horror maps other kids built on Roblox. Bad lighting. Jump scares you could see coming from a mile away. Servers that lagged so hard the monsters teleported instead of walked. It wasn't good. It was just company. My room faced the backyard, and most nights, the only light came from the laptop screen and the porch lamp next door, which stayed on for reasons I never bothered asking about. I'd sit there with my headset on, volume low enough that I could still hear the house settling around me, and click through whatever new horror map had been uploaded that week. They were almost always the same: a flashlight mechanic that barely worked, a monster model ripped from some other game, a jump scare timed to a sound cue you learned to brace for after the second run. I wasn't looking for anything real. I think that's part of why what happened stuck with me the way it did. I'd trained myself not to expect anything real. That July, I found a map called Static Hallway. No real reviews, maybe a few hundred plays, made by an account that looked abandoned. No other games published. No activity in months. I liked games like that. Less chance of running into a server full of 11-year-olds screaming into their mics. More chance of just wandering an empty, badly lit hallway by myself for 20 minutes and calling it a night. When I loaded in that night, it was just me and one other player. His name tag read player_0119. He was standing at the far end of the hallway, completely still, facing a wall. His mic wasn't active. Mine wasn't either. I moved my character a little closer, expecting him to react, to walk away, to do anything. He didn't move. I figured he'd left his laptop to go get food and forgot to close the tab. I kept exploring the map on my own, opening doors, triggering the occasional flickering light. And every couple of minutes I'd glance back at his little icon on the player list, just to check he was still connected. He always was. I kept half an eye on him while I played. The way you keep half an eye on anything that isn't behaving the way it's supposed to. Games like this usually had players who ran around, tested the mechanics, tried to trigger every jump scare in the first 5 minutes just to see them. He did none of that. He stood in that hallway, facing the wall for so long that I started to wonder if his internet had frozen mid-load. If what I was looking at was less a person than a leftover, a connection that hadn't fully dropped. That thought made it worse, somehow, not better. At least a person could be explained. About 10 minutes in, my headset crackled. Someone's mic had opened. I stopped walking and waited, expecting static or nothing. The way it usually goes with random strangers online. The kind of dead air that clicks off again a second later. Instead, a voice came through low and unhurried, like someone talking to a friend across a quiet room, not raised at all, not trying to be heard over anything, just close, like the mic was an inch from his mouth. "Hey, Ryan." I sat there with my hand on the mouse and didn't move it. Ryan wasn't my username. It wasn't anywhere near my username. I'd built my account warranted 2 years earlier with a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing to anybody, least of all a stranger who'd been standing motionless in a horror map for 10 minutes. I told myself it had to be a coincidence, a common enough name that someone might say it into a mic without meaning anything by it. I didn't answer. I just watched his character, still facing the wall, still not moving. Like the voice hadn't come from him at all. A minute passed. Then he said the name of my town. Not a nearby city, not a vague region. The actual name of the town I'd lived in my whole life. Population small enough that saying it out loud to a stranger felt like being pointed at. I remember closing my laptop about an inch. Like that would help, like the game would stop if I could just see less of the screen. I opened it back up because some part of me needed to know what he'd say next. More than I needed to be safe from it. That's the part I still don't fully understand about that night. I kept watching. He said the name of my high school next, said it plainly, the way you'd read something off a form. And then he went quiet for a few seconds, long enough that I almost convinced myself it was over, that whatever this was had run its course. Then, in that same unbothered voice, he asked if my dad's blue pickup was still parked outside. It was. It was parked exactly where it always was, in the driveway, facing the street, visible from our living room window, if you leaned far enough to the left. I hadn't said a word this entire time. I hadn't typed anything into the chat. There was nothing in my profile, nothing in my bio, nothing I could think of that connected any of those 3 facts to the account I was playing on. I disconnected so fast I fumbled the keyboard shortcut twice before it actually worked. I sat in my room for a long time after that, lights off, laptop shut, listening to the house. It was the kind of listening where you're not sure what you're listening for, just that you'll know it when you hear it. Nothing happened. No footsteps outside, no cars slowing down on the street. Just the normal creaks of an old house, cooling off after a hot day. I told myself it was some kid messing with strangers for fun. The kind of thing that goes around forums guessing common names in generic small towns until something lands. About 5 minutes after I closed the laptop, my phone buzzed. A friend request had come in on Discord, an app I barely used outside of a couple of servers with people from school. The account had no friends listed, no server memberships I could see, and a profile picture I recognized immediately. The same blank, featureless avatar player_0119 had been using in the game. There was no message request attached to the friend invite, nothing beyond it. I didn't accept it. I didn't have to. 10 minutes later, a message came through anyway. The kind Discord lets strangers send if your settings aren't locked down, which mine weren't because I was 16 and had never thought to check. It said, "You left too early." I didn't sleep after that. I sat up with the lights off, laptop shut, phone face down on the desk, like putting it out of sight would stop it from buzzing again. Around 2 in the morning, the porch lamp next door clicked off, the way it always did on a timer. And for a second, the dark outside my window went total, no gap in it anywhere. I heard what I told myself was a raccoon getting into the trash cans at the side of the house, a scraping, dragging sound that stopped and started twice before it went quiet for good. I didn't get up to check. I've thought about that a lot since, whether I should have, whether looking would have shown me nothing at all or something I'd still be trying to explain. I stayed in bed with the blanket up to my chin, like I was 8 years old again, and eventually the sky started to lighten, and I fell asleep somewhere in that gray hour before the house woke up. I showed it to my dad the next morning, not right away. I actually sat on it for most of the night, telling myself I was being dramatic, that I'd Google this in daylight and find 50 identical stories from bored teenagers doing the exact same thing to each other for a laugh. I didn't find that. I found a lot of general advice about not sharing your real name online, which didn't help me because I hadn't shared it. My dad read the message twice. He asked what game it was, what server, whether I'd ever used my real name anywhere connected to that account. I told him no, and I watched his face do the thing where he wants to say something reassuring and can't quite make himself say it. He told me to change my passwords, which I did, and to stop playing on that account, which I also did, deleting it outright a few days later. He also called our local police department's non-emergency line, more to have it on record than out of any real hope they'd do something. The officer who called back a day later was polite about it, walked through the basics. He asked whether I'd ever used the same username anywhere else, whether I'd ever joined a voice chat with strangers and mentioned my town out loud, even in passing, even as a joke. I said no to all of it, and I meant it. Though by the end of the call I wasn't as certain of anything as I had been at the start. He explained that usernames get reused more than people think, that some data broker somewhere might have linked an old email to a new one, that voice chat metadata could in theory leak more than people assumed. None of it was an actual answer. It was just a list of things that were possible, offered the way you offer someone a coat when you don't have anything better to give them. There was no report filed beyond the record of the call. There was nothing to charge anyone with. He told my dad to keep an eye on things and to call back if it happened again. For a while, that was the end of it. Or it felt like the end of it. I went back to sleeping like a normal person. School started up again. I mostly stopped thinking about it the way you stop thinking about most things at that age, because there's always something newer to worry about. Then, near the end of September, I got a friend request on a completely different platform, different app, different account, a username I'd never used before because I'd made it fresh after everything that summer. The profile picture was the same blank avatar. I didn't recognize the account name, and I still don't know how anyone found me there, on a service I'd only had for a few weeks, under a name that had no public connection to who I actually was. I didn't accept that one either. There was no message this time, just the request sitting there until I deleted it. I want to tell you that was the last time, and mostly it was. I never got another message. I never heard that voice again, not in a game, not anywhere. But every so often, maybe once or twice a year since, a friend request shows up on some account I barely use, from a profile with no history and that same blank picture, and I delete it without opening anything attached to it because some part of me still doesn't want to know what it would say. I moved away for college a couple years after all of it happened. I still don't play games with open voice chat from strangers. I still glance at the driveway sometimes at night, checking that everything out there is exactly where it's supposed to be, and most nights it is. I never found out who he was or how he knew any of it, and I've stopped expecting that I ever will. What stays with me isn't even the voice itself anymore. It's that line, "You left too early," like the whole thing had been building towards something I never got to see, and somewhere out there, it's still waiting for me to log back in. I ran a small YouTube channel through most of college, the kind with a few thousand subscribers who mostly showed up for one specific format. I'd dig through abandoned corners of Roblox, games with a handful of plays and no updates in years, and record myself walking through them for people who liked that particular flavor of unsettling. Most of it was nothing. Broken physics, missing textures, the occasional genuinely creepy map that someone had clearly put real effort into before giving up on it entirely. I did it because I liked the archaeology of it more than the horror. Somebody had built these things and then vanished, and walking through what was left always felt like reading half a letter. I found the game on a Thursday night, deep in a search that had already gone nowhere for an hour. It didn't have a real name, just a string of letters that looked like a placeholder someone forgot to change, and the description field was empty. 0 favorites. A play count in the low hundreds, most of it probably accidental clicks from people who meant to open something else. No thumbnail beyond the grayed out default. It was exactly the kind of thing my channel existed for, and I had my recording software open before I'd even finished reading the page. I should say for context that I'd gotten fairly practiced at telling the difference between a genuinely creepy abandoned map and a boring one by that point. Most of them fell apart within the first 5 minutes. An empty room, a locked door that led nowhere, a developer who'd clearly given up on the project the moment it stopped being fun to build. The good ones, the rare ones, had a kind of coherence to them even half finished. Hallways that led somewhere, rooms that felt like they belonged to the same building instead of being stitched together from whatever assets were lying around. This one had that coherence from the first hallway, and it put me on alert in the specific, pleasant way a good find always did. The sense that I might actually have something worth an episode. The server list confirmed what the play count already suggested. I was alone. Not low population, not quiet, actually alone. A single slot filled and the rest of the lobby sitting empty, the way a parking lot sits empty at 2 a.m. I remember feeling a small, satisfied kind of relief at that. The specific comfort of knowing nobody was going to run past my camera and ruin a shot. Nobody was going to type something in chat and break the mood I was trying to build. I loaded in. The map was bigger than I expected from a game with that few plays. A stretch of hallway that opened into something like an office floor. Fluorescent lights doing that specific half-dead flicker that always reads as intentional even when it's just bad optimization. Long sightlines down corridors that bent just enough that you couldn't see the far end from where you stood. I started narrating for the recording the way I always did, low and a little dry. The tone my subscribers had come to expect, half genuine unease and half performance for the camera. 20 minutes into a video like this, I usually couldn't have told you anymore which half was which. About 10 minutes in, I noticed him for the first time, just a shape at the very end of one of the long hallways, standing still, facing my direction as far as I could tell at that distance. I've spent enough time in games like this to know how often that turns out to be nothing. A texture glitch. A piece of the environment your brain decides to read as a figure because it's primed to look for one. I zoomed my camera in out of habit more than actual concern. By the time the shot settled, the hallway was empty. I checked the player list without really thinking about it, the way you check something just to confirm what you already assume. 1 player. Me. I kept moving, kept narrating, and I saw him again maybe 5 minutes later, further down a different corridor this time. Same stillness, same distance. Gone the moment I turned the camera fully toward him. It kept happening after that. Always at the edge of a hallway, or half hidden behind a doorway, always vanishing the instant I looked at it directly. Always present again a few minutes later somewhere else in the map. I want to be honest about how I felt in the moment, and because it's easy to tell this story now and make it sound like I was afraid the whole way through, and that's not quite true. For a while, it just felt like good footage. I remember thinking out loud on the recording that whoever built this map had done something genuinely clever with whatever scripted this thing, some kind of scare trigger tied to the camera angle that I hadn't seen implemented that well anywhere else on the platform. I was narrating that theory almost admiringly when it happened for maybe the 6th or 7th time. It was only somewhere around then that the admiration started curdling into something else. The way it does when a pattern keeps repeating long enough that cleverness starts to look less like design and more like attention. The player list never changed. I checked it obsessively by that point. More than made sense for footage I was supposedly just narrating calmly. One player the whole time. No new usernames sliding in. No chat log at all, not one line. Not even the automated messages some of these games throw up when you load in. Just silence in the corner of the screen and a number that stayed exactly the same no matter how many times that shape appeared and disappeared down whatever hallway I happened to be standing in. About 20 minutes into the recording, my screen went white for a fraction of a second. The kind of flash you'd expect from a poorly optimized transition, and when it cleared, there was text sitting in the dead center of my view. Plain white letters with no box around them. No font choice that matched anything else in the game's interface. It said, "Turn around." I sat there for a second too long before I actually did it. Camera and character both, spinning to face whatever was supposedly behind me. There was nothing there. Just more hallway, more of that half-dead fluorescent flicker. The same empty stretch of corridor I'd already walked past twice. I remember actually laughing out loud on the recording. The specific laugh you do when you need your body to release something and there's nothing else built for the job. I said something to the camera about the game finally showing its hand, some line about a cheap scare being the one thing it hadn't tried yet. I kept playing for another 10 minutes after that, mostly out of stubbornness. Wandered through a few more rooms, didn't see the figure again, and eventually wrapped the recording and closed the game down for the night, satisfied I had something usable. I didn't touch the footage again until the next evening. Editing was always the least fun part of the process, so I usually put it off a day. And that Friday I sat down with the raw file to start cutting it into something postable, trimming dead air, marking the moments worth keeping. I went through it once at normal speed first, the way I always did, just to remind myself what I actually had. It played the same way it had felt in the moment, unsettling in a low, manageable way, nothing that made me stop the timeline. It was on the second pass, going frame by frame through one of the quieter stretches to find a clean-cut point, that I saw it, not in the hallway, behind me. My own character, from the angle the in-game camera happened to be sitting at during a slow section of walking, and just at the very edge of what the frame actually captured. Close enough that another half step of camera distance would have caught it fully, was the shape. Not far down a corridor this time, a few feet back, matching my movement almost exactly. Close enough that if I'd been playing in first person instead of the slightly pulled back third person I always used for these videos, it would have been standing close enough to touch. I went back through the footage after that slower, deliberately, no longer looking for a cut point, looking for something else entirely. It was there for almost the whole recording. Not constantly in frame because the edge of a third-person camera only catches so much, but there, in nearly every wide shot, if I paused at the right frame and looked close enough at the margin of the screen, always the same rough distance behind my character, always just outside whatever I'd been consciously looking at while I played. Every time I'd zoomed in on the version of it standing far down a hallway, the real one had apparently been standing right behind me the entire time. Patient, exactly out of view, waiting for a camera angle that never quite came. I sat with my hands still on the mouse for a long time after I found the clearest frame of it. A single still image I ended up staring at far longer than made any sense. My own character, mid-stride down a hallway, I remembered walking, and behind it, close enough to have been in step with me the entire time, a shape with no real detail to it beyond a rough human outline. No face I could make out, no matter how much I zoomed or brightened the image. Just a suggestion of a shape standing exactly where a person would stand if they were following someone closely enough to know precisely how far back to stay. I stopped editing. I didn't upload that video, not that week, not ever. I told my subscribers I'd lost the footage to a corrupted file, which wasn't true, though by the time I said it, some part of me had decided it might as well be. I still have the raw recording saved somewhere, on a drive I don't plug in very often. I've thought more than once about going back and actually studying it properly. Timestamping every frame. The shape appears in, trying to build some kind of explanation out of it, the way I would have for any other piece of footage on that channel. I've never actually done it. I tell myself it's because I don't have the time anymore, which is true in the small, practical sense, and not true in any of the ways that actually matter. I never opened that game again. I checked once, a few months later, mostly out of a curiosity I couldn't fully talk myself out of. And the page was gone entirely. No listing, no play count, nothing left to search for. I don't know if it was taken down by whoever made it or simply removed for inactivity, the way abandoned pages sometimes are. Either way, there's no server list to check anymore. No way to confirm whether it would still say one player if I somehow found a way back in. I think about that more than I'd like to some nights. Whether the count was ever really one to begin with, or whether it had simply never learned to count the both of us as two. I was 14 when I got into a building game called Foundation Craft, which was less a game than a shared canvas. No objectives, no monsters, just an open plot of land and a set of tools. And whatever you built stayed there until you tore it down yourself. I liked it because it was slow in a way nothing else in my life was. You could spend 2 hours placing individual roof tiles and call that a good afternoon, and nobody was keeping score of anything. I'd been playing it alone for a couple of months before that summer, mostly late at night. Mostly on a server that never had more than a handful of people logged in at once. It suited me. I wasn't looking to make friends on there. I was looking for something quiet to do with my hands, in the loose way a keyboard and mouse count as hands. Something that didn't require me to be good at talking to people, which I wasn't especially good at that year for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this. That's probably part of why it worked on me as well as it did. I wasn't expecting company, so when good company showed up, I didn't think to be careful with it. I met him on a Tuesday. I don't remember his exact username anymore, just that it had numbers at the end, the way most usernames did back then, and that his profile picture was a blueprint sketch of a house, hand-drawn, the kind of thing you'd expect from someone who actually knew what they were doing. He'd claimed an empty plot next to mine and was already 3 walls into something ambitious when I first noticed him. I complimented his roofline in the public chat, mostly out of politeness, and he asked if I wanted help finishing my own build. I said sure. That was the whole beginning of it. Nothing about that first conversation would have made anyone nervous. We built together for almost a week. He was good, genuinely good. Better than anyone else I'd run into on that server. And he was patient about teaching me things. How to angle a roof so it didn't look flat and lifeless. How to stagger windows so a house looked lived in instead of built. We talked while we worked. the way you do with someone you're spending hours next to, even if that someone is just a username and a voice. He asked what my room actually looked like, whether my real house had a porch, what kind of yard I had. I answered most of it without thinking twice. It felt like the natural overflow of a shared hobby. Two people who liked houses talking about houses. By the end of that week, he had an idea. He wanted to build our real homes side by side as a kind of collaborative project. Him working from my description, me working from his. It sounded fun in the way most things sounded fun to me back then. Low stakes, a little flattering that someone with that much skill wanted to spend more time building something with me specifically. I started describing my house from memory. The layout roughly, the color, the shape of the roof, the way the driveway curved before it reached the garage. It was somewhere in the second round of details that the questions started feeling less like a shared hobby and more like an interview. He wanted specifics I hadn't thought to give. The kind of small, exact details that don't come up naturally when you're just describing a house to someone for fun. Not the color of the walls, but the color of the front door specifically. Not the neighborhood in general, but what was directly across the street from it, whether there was anything nearby you'd use as a landmark if you were trying to find the place yourself. I remember typing out an answer to one of those questions and then deleting it before I sent it. Not because I decided anything was wrong yet, just because some small, wordless part of me didn't want to hit send. I stopped answering after that. Not dramatically. I didn't say anything about it. I just started responding to his other messages and letting the specific ones sit there unanswered in the chat log. He didn't push. He just kept building, kept talking about the project like nothing had changed, and told me before he logged off that night that he'd keep working on his side even without my help, that he had a good enough idea of the place by now to finish it himself. I sat there after he logged off, looking at the two half-finished houses side by side on the plot, mine and the one he'd started of his own, and I remember feeling a specific kind of unease that didn't have a shape yet. The kind where you can't point to any single thing that's wrong, but everything about the last 20 minutes feels slightly off in retrospect. Like a photo that's been mirrored, and you can't say why it looks wrong until you notice your watch is on the other wrist. I closed the game without saying goodnight, which I'd never done with him before, and I told myself I'd just been tired. I didn't sleep well that night, and I couldn't have told you exactly why. Nothing had happened. Nobody had threatened me. I just had the specific low feeling you get when you realize a conversation you thought was going one direction had actually been going somewhere else the whole time. And you only notice once it had already gotten far enough along that undoing it didn't feel possible. The next afternoon, I got an invite to a private server, just his name, and a message that said the project was done. I almost didn't join. I sat there with the invite open for a long time, telling myself I could just leave it, that I didn't have to see whatever he'd built, that curiosity wasn't a good enough reason to open something I already had a bad feeling about. I joined anyway. I've replayed that decision a lot since then. Whether things would have gone differently if I hadn't, though I don't think they would have. I think he would have found another way to make sure I saw it. The house was mine. Not a house that resembled mine in a general way, but mine, down to details I was fairly sure I'd never actually described to him. Not in so many words. The roof line matched. The color matched. The driveway curved the exact way ours did before it reached the garage, and parked in that driveway was a vehicle built block by block into a close approximation of the exact car my parents drove. Same shape, same rough color, right down to a detail on the side that I couldn't remember ever mentioning to anyone in that chat. The mailbox at the end of the driveway had a name painted on it, and it was my family's last name, not close to it, not a guess. Exactly it. I stood my character in front of that house for a long time without moving. The way you do when your body understands something before your mind catches all the way up to it. Eventually, I made myself walk inside because some part of me needed to see how far it went, and it went all the way. Furniture in roughly the right places. A version of my own room upstairs, close enough to make my stomach drop. I found the basement last, down a narrow set of stairs I almost didn't take, and at the bottom of it, built into the wall where you couldn't miss it, was a sign made out of blocks, spelling out a short message that I'm not going to repeat here, only because I've said it out loud enough times since that repeating it again doesn't feel like it does anything except give it more room than it deserves. I'll just tell you it made clear in a way that left nothing open to interpretation that he considered the address a place he now had a right to. I blocked him before I'd even fully processed what I was looking at, hands moving faster than my thinking was. I logged off and sat there in my room with the lights on, which I never usually did, and I told my mom everything that night, the building, the questions, the replica, all of it, in the kind of rushed, out-of-order way you tell someone something when you're still catching up to how serious it actually is yourself. She didn't ask me to calm down or slow down. She sat with me while I found the account again on a friend's device to show her, and she took photos of everything on the screen before we did anything else. The house, the car, the sign, the mailbox, in case it mattered later, in case anyone needed proof, beyond my own account of it. We reported the account to the platform that night. My mom also called our local police department, mostly the way you make a call, probably won't lead anywhere, but that you'd never forgive yourself for not making. The officer on the phone took the details, the platform, the account name, what had been built, and was honest that without an actual attempt to contact outside the game, there wasn't much they could act on directly, though he said the report itself mattered, that patterns like this sometimes showed up more than once under different names, and having it on record was worth something even if it didn't feel like it that night. The account was gone by the next morning. Not banned, as far as I ever found out. Just gone. Deleted from whatever end he was controlling it from before the platform had even finished reviewing our report. No new username ever resurfaced that I recognized. No message. Nothing that connected back to him in any way I could point to. We moved a little over a year later for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this. And I remember standing in the empty living room of our new place before any of the furniture arrived, thinking about that basement sign for the first time in months, wondering if it mattered that the address it had been so certain about didn't exist for us anymore. I still don't fully know why that thought comforted me as much as it did, given that I never learned who he was or how far his actual reach ever went beyond a screen. I want to tell you the feeling faded completely. Mostly it did, but I still don't play building games with strangers. Not really, not the way I used to, and every so often, usually late at night for no reason I can name. I think about that mailbox with our name painted on it in a color I never described to anyone. And I wonder how a person gets that close without ever once needing to say where he actually was.